They didn't notice her when she boarded. Just a teenage girl in a uniform. No salute, no respect, just glances and a smirk from row 14C. But then the cockpit door slammed open. A body hit the floor. The plane dipped. Someone screamed. The captain wasn't moving. Neither was the first officer. The cabin froze. Flight attendants panicked. And Clara stood up. She didn't shout. She didn't wait. She walked toward the cockpit, step by step. Not because she was asked, but because she knew the voice that would soon come through the radio would be her father's. Before we continue, where are you watching from today? This story means more when I know who's listening. I read every comment. Really. The airport was busy, as always. Military families moved in quiet clusters, some in uniform, others in plain travel wear. No one looked twice at Clara Dawson as she adjusted her cadet tie in front of Gate B-22. Just another teen tagging along, they assumed. Just another base brat. But Clara stood straighter than most adults. Her posture, her calm, her silence, all of it had been shaped by years of her father's quiet discipline. He wasn't active anymore. Not after the incident. Not after they pulled his wings and pushed him out. But Clara had never seen anyone walk with more gravity than James Dawson, and she carried that in every step. Now she was flying alone. A training visit to her aunt, also Air Force, stationed in the Rockies. Her mother had insisted. "You need fresh air, Clara. New skies." She boarded the flight last, her tablet tucked under one arm, already loaded with aircraft schematics and emergency manuals for the Boeing C-40, the military variant of a commercial 737. As she stepped into the aisle, a teenage boy in a hoodie elbowed his friend. "Check it out. Halloween came early," he muttered. His friend laughed too loud. A few nearby passengers smirked. Clara didn't flinch. She'd seen this look before. People who smiled at the uniform when it was sharp on a man but scoffed when it was clean on a girl. She moved to her seat, row 17A, window side, and buckled in without a word. She wasn't here to prove anything. 20 minutes after takeoff, the flight leveled at cruising altitude. Clara reviewed flap control sequences and airflow diagrams, one eye on her screen, the other on the faint outline of clouds below. A flight attendant passed with a smile. "Something to drink, sweetheart?" "No, thank you," Clara replied, voice steady. She sipped water, then returned to her notes. Her father always said, "You don't train for the routine. You train for when everything goes wrong." She never forgot. A jolt shook the aircraft, not severe, just enough to make her grip the armrest. Then came a strange sound, metallic, hollow. A moment later, the intercom cracked, then fell silent. She looked up. The cabin lights flickered. A man 2 rows ahead stood halfway up, glanced toward the front, then sat again, confused. A flight attendant rushed down the aisle, whispering frantically into her radio. Something was wrong. Then the cockpit door opened, not carefully, not with control. It flew wide, slammed against the frame. A man, the captain, stumbled out, gasping, and collapsed face down just outside the lavatory. Screams. One from the back. 2 from the middle rows. The first officer appeared, but he was swaying, clutching his chest. Then he too went down, inside the cockpit. A young airman stood, clearly shaken. "Are those both the pilots?" he shouted. One flight attendant nodded, her face pale. Clara stood. No one noticed at first. Then the boy from before, the one who mocked her, said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Oh, come on. What's she gonna do? Recite a checklist?" Clara didn't answer. She moved forward slowly, one step, then another. Her hand rested on the headrest of 16C, then 15A, 14. The aircraft was still in the air, but it wouldn't stay there forever. And Clara had listened to every story her father told. She had studied every manual he gave her. And she knew what to do, if someone, anyone, would just let her. Clara reached the front of the cabin just as 2 flight attendants tried to drag the unconscious captain away from the aisle. The first officer lay inside the cockpit, barely breathing, his oxygen mask dangling from the console. "Back to your seat, miss," one of the attendants said, her voice cracking. Clara kept her eyes on the door. "They're both down," she said quietly. The attendant blinked. "It's being handled. We've contacted the tower. There's no one else on board with flight credentials, said the younger attendant behind her. Unless... They both looked at each other, then back at Clara. I've trained on this model, Clara said. With my father. He's a C-40 specialist, I know. You're a child, the older attendant snapped, trying to keep her voice low. You're wearing a school uniform. Clara took a breath. Ma'am, this isn't about uniforms. A young officer, maybe early 20s, stood from his seat 2 rows back. Tall, rigid, loud. This is ridiculous, he barked. She's not touching those controls, not while I'm on this plane. Clara turned to him, calm, measured. Do you have experience landing a Boeing? He hesitated. No, but... Then let me do what I was trained to do. The older attendant reached for the wall phone again, speaking in urgent tones. Clara stepped aside but stayed close. The door to the cockpit was still open. She could see the systems blinking. She could hear the autopilot's dull hum. Tower's on the line, the attendant finally said. They're asking if there's anyone with military aviation background on board. No answer. Clara lifted her chin. Call James Dawson, she said. The attendant blinked. What? Call him. He's in Nevada, retired Air Force. Serial 4210 Delta. He trained pilots on this model for 17 years. The young officer scoffed. That guy? Wasn't he discharged? Clara's jaw clenched. He wasn't dishonored. He was sidelined. The attendant hesitated. Then, without a word, she relayed the name to the tower. In a quiet suburb near Nellis Air Force Base, James Dawson was trimming the hedges in front of a modest house with faded shutters and a cracked porch. He wore no uniform. Just jeans, boots, and the kind of silence only veterans wear properly. His cell buzzed once. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. Then he answered. This is James Dawson. The voice on the other end was clipped, urgent. Mr. Dawson, we have a live emergency. Civilian aircraft. C-40 variant. Both pilots are unconscious. One of the passengers says you can help. Who? He asked, stepping toward the porch. Clara Dawson. He didn't speak. Not for a full 3 seconds. Then, put me through. Patch me into the cockpit. Back on the plane, Clara stood just outside the cockpit. The young officer was still fuming in the background. The cabin was tense. Passengers whispering, watching, judging. A voice came through the flight attendant's earpiece. We've got him. Your father is on the line. Clara exhaled. One of the attendants held out a headset. Clara took it slowly, carefully, like it was the most sacred object she'd ever touched. She placed it over her ears. A crackle. Then, Clara? She closed her eyes. Yes, Dad. His voice wasn't rushed, wasn't panicked. Talk to me, sweetheart. What's your altitude? She looked at the console, her voice steady. 34,000, heading 270. Autopilot still engaged. Good, he said. I'm with you now, step by step. She stepped into the cockpit, sat in the left seat, and the door closed behind her. The headset felt heavy on Clara's ears, not because of weight, but because of what it meant. It was real now. No simulator, no reset button. No protective voice of her father from the next room. This time, his voice came from 800 miles away, but it was still the same voice, measured, exact, and just human enough to keep her breathing. All right, Clara. Let's go through the basics first. What do you see on your main display? She scanned quickly. Primary flight display is live. Altimeter reading steady. Heading confirmed 270. Autopilot on. Copy that, James said. Any warning lights? No system failures. Engine temp green. Electrical panels steady. Cabin pressure normal. He paused. That's my girl. Her hand trembled just a little. She placed it on her lap, held it there. Her heart was louder than the engines now. Outside the cockpit, silence wasn't peaceful. It was fear. Flight attendants were holding the line. Passengers whispered. Some still believed a miracle would come walking down the aisle. But it had already taken its seat. Back in Nevada, James was pacing. He hadn't touched a cockpit in years. They stopped calling after the court-martial. It wasn't dishonor, just quiet exile. But Clara had never asked him about the details. She had only ever asked for his manuals, his stories, his time. And now, the system that had tossed him aside was about to trust him with 142 lives, through a voice line, through his daughter. "Okay, Clara, we're going to prep the descent plan early. I'll walk you through each phase." She nodded, forgetting he couldn't see her. "Yes, sir." He almost smiled. She adjusted the seat, lowered the rudder pedals, and extended her fingers over the yoke. "I'm going to disengage the autopilot on your mark," she said. "Not yet. First, confirm the airport. Nearest with military coordination is El Paso, runway 4L, long enough for full-body aircraft." "Good call," James said. "Comms have it locked in. They'll clear the airspace. You'll come in at 180 knots on initial approach. Winds are cross at 12 knots. Nothing crazy." "Copy." He gave her each instruction with clarity and rhythm, not a single word wasted. They had practiced this before, not with lives at stake, not in the real sky, but it had always felt real enough. Now it was. In the cabin, the mood had changed. Rumors had started. "She's flying the plane?" someone whispered. A kid? The boy who had mocked her earlier sat in stunned silence. He had seen her walk into the cockpit. He hadn't seen her come back out. He turned to the nearest attendant. "Is this for real?" "She's being guided," the attendant replied gently, "by someone who knows her, knows this plane." In the cockpit, Clara felt the seconds narrow. "Dad, I'm ready." "You sure?" he asked. "Yes." "Okay," he said. "On my mark. 3, 2, 1, disengage." She flipped the switch. The slight bump in the yoke told her the machine was hers now. It was heavier, more responsive, more alive. Clara adjusted her grip, aligned the nose, felt the wind. "Good," her father said in her ear. "You're flying." She exhaled slowly. "I'm flying." The instruments lit up. The runways ahead. A wall of white clouds between her and the ground. "Let's bring her home," James said. Clara nodded and descended into the silence. The clouds thickened. A blanket of white pressed against the windshield, obscuring everything. For a moment, Clara saw nothing, only gray. "Maintain current pitch," James said. His voice was calm, a tether to something solid. "We're on glide path. Speed 180, altitude dropping through 9,000. Perfect. Hold that. You'll break through the cloud layer soon." Clara's fingers trembled, but her grip stayed firm. The yoke moved with her, smooth, responsive, not like the simulator. This was heavier. Every correction had weight. Every movement had meaning. Her father's voice stayed steady. "You're doing great, Clara. You're flying cleaner than half the officers I trained." She smiled for the first time. "I'll take that as a compliment." On the ground at El Paso Tower, air traffic control watched the radar screen like it was a live broadcast. Several senior officers stood behind the controllers now, not issuing orders, just listening. "She's still stable," the lead controller muttered. "Straight line, controlled descent, good spacing." One of the generals leaned forward. "Who's guiding her?" The answer came from the headset. "James Dawson." The room fell silent. A few remembered the name, a few didn't, but none of them moved. Back inside the cabin, the air was different. No longer chaos, just suspense. The passengers had grown quiet. The intercom clicked. The voice of the flight attendant came on, gently. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're currently descending toward a secure landing. Please remain seated and calm. Our pilot is being guided by someone very experienced." She didn't say who. She didn't have to. The entire front section had seen the headset pass to Clara, had seen her disappear into the cockpit. Even the young officer who had doubted her now sat with his head lowered, hands folded, saying nothing. "Clara, you're through the clouds," James said. She blinked, and there it was, the runway, far ahead, but real, lined with lights, solid ground. "I have visual." "Then let's bring her down." She adjusted her angle, read the wind data. Light crosswind. She compensated. "Lowering landing gear." The cabin thudded faintly as the wheels locked into place. "Flaps full." Check. "Speed 140. Check. "Altitude 2,000 and falling." "Center her." "Just like we practiced." Clara stared down the runway, a narrow path in a world of blur. "Touchdown in 30 seconds." came the voice from the tower. James whispered, "You've already won, Clara. Now just finish it." The last seconds slowed. Clara's breathing evened out. Her left hand on the throttle, right on the yoke. The wheels hit, a small bounce. Then contact, firm, real. She braked steadily. Reverse thrust. The aircraft decelerated like a beast obeying its rider. Passengers began to cry. Some cheered. Some didn't know what to do. Inside the cockpit, Clara just stared forward, eyes wide, lips slightly parted. "Full stop," she said softly. A beat of silence. Then James, "You did it, Clara." Her hands finally let go. Her shoulders dropped. Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them away. "Tower, this is Dawson," James added. "Aircraft is safely grounded. Request immediate medical for pilots." The voice on the line replied, almost reverently, "Copy that. And Mr. Dawson? Thank you." On the tarmac, vehicles swarmed the plane. Ambulances, military escorts, news vans. Clara emerged from the cockpit, headset still around her neck. The passengers stood as she walked down the aisle. A path formed naturally. Nobody laughed now. Nobody looked away. The same boy who had mocked her earlier stepped back, head down. She passed him without a word. The final step was hers. Outside, medics rushed to the cockpit. A military officer approached her on the stairs. "Cadet Dawson?" "Yes, sir." He saluted. She returned it shakily. A screen nearby showed James's face, patched in via secure line. He was watching. Clara lifted the headset. "Dad, we're down." He nodded once. No words, just pride and peace. If you believe moments like this still matter, and that quiet dignity deserves to be seen, consider subscribing. We tell stories for people who still care. The sun was setting over the airfield when the side gate opened. No press, no speeches, just the rhythmic sound of boots on concrete. Clara walked in silence beside two Air Force officers. Her uniform was slightly wrinkled from the flight, her posture still perfect. At a small formation near the hangar, a few names were called. Officers, medics, two of the flight attendants. Then, Civilian Cadet Clara Dawson, for exemplary judgment under critical threat. No podium, no cameras, just a simple step forward. An officer approached, in his hand, a velvet box. Inside, a silver challenge coin engraved with a single word, "Resolve." He handed it to her without explanation. No speech, no applause. Clara closed her fingers around it and stepped back. Behind her, another name was called. James Dawson, for remote command assistance under crisis protocol. The crowd shifted. Some turned, others whispered. The man who hadn't worn a uniform in years walked across the tarmac, not with swagger, but with stillness. Quiet, measured. He stopped beside Clara and saluted the officer. She looked at him, surprised. He returned her gaze without a word, just a nod. The coin he received bore the word, "Honor." Later, as the crowd dispersed, they walked together to the edge of the field. The aircraft she had landed still sat in the distance, alone on the tarmac. Maintenance crews circled it quietly. Clara removed the headset from her bag and held it in her hands. "This used to be yours," she said. James smiled faintly. "It's yours now." She looked down at the coin in her palm. "Resolve." He opened his. "Honor." Seems they still remember what that means. She turned toward the plane. "I didn't do it alone." He shook his head. "You did it because you trained for it, because you listened, because you acted." She walked closer to the aircraft until she was near enough to place her hand on its cool metal. Faded numbers. Scorch marks near the wheel well. Evidence that the day had happened. James stopped just behind her. "You know," he said, "they told me once I'd never be useful in the sky again." Clara turned. "You never left the sky." She stepped back beside him. Together, they stood in silence, watching the last plane of the day lift off, its lights blinking against a darkening sky. They didn't need applause. They didn't need headlines. They had something better, each other, and the sky, still open. If this story moved you, type guidance in the comments. Your voice matters, and I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, here's your quiet reminder. Thank you for being here.